My name is Victoria Hartwell, and I'm about to tell you about the day that shattered my perfectly crafted world into 1,000 pieces, only to reveal that those pieces were never truly mine to begin with. I was 36 years old, living what I thought was an enviable life in a charming brownstone in the heart of Brooklyn, New York. I worked as a senior event planner for one of the most prestigious firms in Manhattan, orchestrating elaborate weddings and corporate galas for clients who had more money than sense. My husband, Oliver Hartwell, was a financial consultant who had been working remotely for the past year, claiming that the flexibility allowed him to focus on building his client base while maintaining a better work-life balance. We had been married for 9 years, and I genuinely believed we were one of those couples who had figured it out. You know, the secret formula to a happy marriage. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, but in a warm, community-oriented way rather than a nosy, intrusive manner. Our next-door neighbor, Isabel Montgomery, had become my closest confidant since she and her husband Marcus moved in about 4 years ago with their 3 young daughters. Isabel was a freelance graphic designer who worked from home, and we had fallen into an easy rhythm of morning coffee dates on her stoop, sharing recipes over the fence that separated our tiny backyards, and coordinating our schedules so we could catch the same yoga class at the studio 3 blocks away. I trusted her with my deepest insecurities, my professional frustrations, and even the occasional marital complaint that every wife shares with her best friend. She knew that Oliver had been distant lately, that our intimate life had become almost non-existent, that he had started going to the gym at odd hours and coming home smelling like expensive cologne I had never bought him. She listened with sympathetic eyes and assured me that all marriages went through rough patches, that men sometimes just needed space to work through their own issues. Before I dive deeper into this story, I want to ask you something personal. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Your voice matters, and together we can create a space where truth is celebrated and shared. That particular Wednesday started like any other day in my meticulously organized life. I woke up at 6:15 in the morning, went through my skincare routine with the precision of a surgeon, made a green smoothie that tasted like grass but promised glowing skin and boundless energy, and selected a navy blue pantsuit that made me feel powerful and professional. Oliver was still asleep when I left, or at least I thought he was asleep, sprawled across our king-sized bed with the white duvet pulled up to his chin. I kissed his forehead out of habit, a ritual that had lost its tenderness somewhere along the way and had become more of a mechanical gesture, like checking off an item on a to-do list. He mumbled something incoherent, and I took that as my cue to leave. The morning at work was chaotic in the best possible way. We were in the final stages of planning a wedding for the daughter of a tech billionaire, and every detail had to be absolutely perfect. There were florists to coordinate with, caterers demanding answers about dietary restrictions, and a bride who changed her mind about the color scheme every 48 hours. My assistant, a bright young woman named Sophie, was running around like her hair was on fire, trying to keep all the vendors happy while I juggled phone calls and emails. Around 11:30 in the morning, I realized I had forgotten my iPad at home, and that iPad contained all the notes from my meeting with the wedding planner from the venue. I needed those notes for a conference call scheduled at 1 in the afternoon, and there was no way I could wing it without looking unprepared and unprofessional. I told Sophie I would be back in an hour, grabbed my car keys from my desk drawer, and headed out into the bright sunshine of a perfect spring day. The drive from my office in Midtown Manhattan back to Brooklyn took about 35 minutes with moderate traffic. I spent the entire drive thinking about the wedding, mentally reviewing seating arrangements, and wondering if we should add more uplighting in the reception hall. My mind was so occupied with work that I barely registered the journey, navigating through familiar streets on autopilot until I pulled up in front of my brownstone. The first thing I noticed was Isabel's silver SUV parked directly in front of my house, instead of in front of hers. That was odd, but not alarming. Maybe she had parked there because someone was visiting Marcus and had taken her usual spot. I unlocked the front door with my key, stepped into the foyer, and immediately felt that something was off. The house had a strange quality to it, a heaviness in the air that I could not quite identify. It was too quiet, and yet not quiet enough. There was a sound coming from somewhere upstairs. A faint rhythmic creaking that made my stomach tighten with an inexplicable sense of dread. I called out Oliver's name as I walked through the foyer and into the living room, but there was no response. His laptop was open on the coffee table, the screen dark but clearly recently used, based on the warmth I felt when I accidentally brushed against it. His phone was nowhere to be seen, which meant he was probably upstairs. I kicked off my heels because they were pinching my toes, and I started climbing the stairs to our second floor, each step feeling heavier than the last as that creaking sound grew louder and more distinct. My rational brain was trying to supply innocent explanations. Maybe Oliver was rearranging furniture. Maybe he was exercising. Maybe he was fixing something that had broken. But my gut knew better. My gut was screaming at me to turn around, to walk back down those stairs, to get in my car and drive away and pretend I had never come home. But I could not stop myself. I reached the landing and walked down the hallway toward our bedroom. And that is when I heard the voices. Low murmurs, a woman's breathless laugh, a man's deep groan. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob of my own bedroom, the room I had decorated with such care, choosing every piece of furniture and every throw pillow to create a sanctuary of peace and comfort. I turned the knob slowly, pushed the door open, and my entire world imploded. There they were, my husband and my best friend, tangled together in my bed, on my sheets, in my space. Oliver was on top of Isabel, and they were so lost in each other that they did not even notice me standing in the doorway for several long seconds. I watched them, frozen in a moment that felt like it lasted an eternity, but was probably only 5 or 6 seconds in reality. Isabel's eyes opened first, and when she saw me, her face went from flushed pleasure to absolute horror in the span of a heartbeat. She let out a small shriek and pushed Oliver off of her, scrambling to cover herself with my expensive Egyptian cotton sheets. Oliver turned his head, following her gaze, and when his eyes met mine, I saw something I had never seen in him before. Not guilt, not shame, at least not immediately. What I saw first was annoyance, as if I had interrupted something important and inconvenient. That look lasted maybe half a second before it morphed into panic. But I had seen it, and it told me everything I needed to know about how little he actually respected me. Nobody spoke for what felt like an hour, but was probably more like 10 seconds. The silence was so thick and suffocating that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then Oliver found his voice and said my name, Victoria, in this tone that was half pleading and half defensive, as if he were about to explain why this was somehow not as bad as it looked, or worse, somehow my fault. I held up my hand to stop him from speaking, because I knew that whatever words came out of his mouth next would only make me angrier. I felt surprisingly calm, almost detached, as if I were watching this scene unfold in a movie, rather than living it in real time. My voice, when I finally spoke, was steady and cold, colder than I had ever heard it before. I said, "Do not say a single word. Do not move. Do not get out of that bed. Both of you stay exactly where you are." I turned around, walked out of the bedroom, and closed the door behind me with a soft click that felt more ominous than if I had slammed it. My hands were still shaking, but my mind had gone into a strange, hyper-focused mode. I walked down the hallway to the guest room, which Oliver had been using as his home office. His desk was covered with papers, notebooks, and his second laptop, the one he used for personal stuff. I sat down in his chair, opened the laptop, and was relieved to find that he had not logged out. His email was open, his messages were accessible, and his cloud storage was right there waiting for me to explore. I knew what I was about to find would hurt, but I also knew that I needed to see the full extent of the betrayal before I decided what to do next. The first thing I found was their text message thread, and oh my God, it went back almost 2 years. 2 years of good morning beautiful messages and I cannot stop thinking about you confessions and detailed plans for when they could meet up without getting caught. 2 years of them laughing about me, calling me clueless, joking about how easy it was to fool me because I was always so busy with work. There were messages from just last week where Isabel had written, "Victoria actually told me today that she thinks our friendship is the best thing that ever happened to her. Can you believe it?" And Oliver had responded with a laughing emoji and the words, "She has no idea, does she? It is almost too easy." I felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart till it stopped beating. But I kept reading because I needed to know everything. I needed to understand the full scope of what they had done to me. I found messages where they discussed how to eventually break the news to Marcus and me, where they fantasized about moving in together and blending their lives. I found messages where Oliver complained about me, calling me boring and uptight and frigid, using intimate details about our private life to entertain Isabel. I found messages where Isabel shared things Marcus had told her in confidence, vulnerabilities and insecurities that she then used to mock him with Oliver. But what really made my blood run cold was the financial planning they had been doing behind my back. I found a shared spreadsheet where Oliver had been calculating how to hide assets, how to make sure that when he divorced me, I would walk away with as little as possible. He had been moving money into offshore accounts, listing assets under his business partner's name, and consulting with a lawyer about the best strategy to protect his wealth. There were notes about selling our brownstone out from under me, about claiming that certain valuable items were gifts from his family rather than marital property. He had it all planned out, and the timeline suggested he was going to wait just a few more months before pulling the trigger, giving himself enough time to hide everything valuable and leave me with nothing but the shock of betrayal and an empty bank account. I sat there in that office chair, staring at the evidence of 2 years of calculated deception, and I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, pulsing like an open wound, but they were being rapidly overshadowed by a cold, clear rage. I was not going to cry. I was not going to fall apart. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Instead, I was going to take everything I had just learned, and I was going to use it to destroy them the same way they had tried to destroy me. I took screenshots of everything, the text messages, the financial spreadsheets, the emails to his lawyer, the shared calendar where they had marked their secret meetups. I uploaded everything to my personal cloud storage and emailed copies to myself at 3 different email addresses, just to be absolutely sure I would not lose this evidence. Then I opened Oliver's contact list and found the number for Marcus Montgomery, Isabel's husband. My finger hovered over the call button for just a moment while I considered whether I was really ready to detonate this bomb. But then I remembered the message where Isabel had called me clueless, and I pressed call without another second of hesitation. Marcus answered on the 3rd ring, his voice warm and friendly. "Hey, Victoria, what is up? Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath and said, "Marcus, I need you to come to my house right now. Do not ask questions. Just come. There is something you need to see, and it cannot wait." The urgency in my voice must have communicated the seriousness of the situation, because he did not argue or ask for details. He just said, "I am on my way. I will be there in 10 minutes. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, letting the weight of what I was about to do settle over me. I was about to destroy 2 marriages, shatter the illusion of friendship and trust that had defined our little neighborhood community and exposed two people who had spent years carefully crafting a lie. But they had done this to themselves. I was just the messenger, the one pulling back the curtain to reveal the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. While I waited for Marcus to arrive, I went back to the bedroom door. I could hear Oliver and Isabel whispering frantically on the other side, probably trying to figure out what to say, how to spin this, what excuse could possibly make this okay. I did not bother knocking. I just opened the door and found them partially dressed now, sitting on opposite sides of the bed, like two teenagers who had been caught by their parents. Oliver started to speak. "Victoria, please let me explain," but I cut him off immediately. I said, "I do not want to hear a single word from either of you. I have already seen everything I need to see. I have read every message, every plan, every cruel joke you made at my expense. I know about the offshore accounts, Oliver. I know about your plan to leave me with nothing. I know that this has been going on for 2 years. Not just a moment of weakness or a mistake, but a calculated long-term deception. And Isabel, I know exactly what kind of friend you have been to me. I know what you said about me behind my back. I know how you and Oliver laughed about how stupid I was for trusting you." Isabel started crying, these big dramatic sobs that might have moved me if I had not just read hundreds of messages proving how little she actually cared about me. She said, "Victoria, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to hurt you." The thing is, I did not believe her for a second, because people who never mean to hurt you do not spend 2 years actively planning to betray you. Oliver tried a different approach, standing up and taking a step toward me with his hands outstretched, like he was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. He said, "Victoria, you're right. I have been a terrible husband and I have made horrible choices. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. Do not throw away 9 years of marriage over something that does not have to define us." I actually laughed at that, a short, bitter sound that surprised even me. I said, "Do not flatter yourself, Oliver. This is not me throwing away our marriage. You did that 2 years ago when you decided to sleep with my best friend and plot to steal from me. This is me recognizing that our marriage ended a long time ago. I was just too blind to see it." The doorbell rang at that exact moment, and I knew Marcus had arrived. I looked at Oliver and Isabel and said, "Stay in this room. Do not come out until I tell you to. If you try to leave, I will make sure every single person we know sees the evidence I have collected. Your families, your friends, your colleagues. Everyone will know exactly what you did." Oliver's face went pale because he knew I was not bluffing. I turned and walked out of the room, closing the door behind me once again. I went downstairs and opened the front door to find Marcus standing on my stoop, looking worried and confused. He was still in his work clothes, dress pants and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he had clearly run the entire way from his house because he was slightly out of breath. "Victoria, what is going on?" he asked, searching my face for clues. "Is someone hurt? Are you okay?" I stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. I said, "Nobody's physically hurt, but I need to show you something, and it's going to be very difficult to see. Your wife is upstairs in my bedroom with my husband, and they have been having an affair for the past 2 years." Marcus just stared at me like I had started speaking a foreign language. He blinked several times, opened his mouth, closed it again, and then said, "What? That is not. Isabel would never. Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshots I had taken. I watched his face as he scrolled through message after message, his expression shifting from disbelief to confusion to dawning horror. His hands started shaking so badly that I had to take the phone back from him because I was afraid he was going to drop it. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes and said, 2 years? They've been doing this for 2 years? How did I not know? How did we not know?" I said, "Because they are really good liars, Marcus. Because they knew exactly what to say and how to act to keep us believing in a fairy tale that never existed. We trusted them, and they used that trust as a weapon against us. Marcus sank down onto my couch, his head in his hands, and I could see his whole body shaking with suppressed emotion. After a long moment, he looked up at me and said, "I need to see her. I need to hear her say it to my face. I need to understand how the woman I have spent 12 years with, the mother of my children, could do something like this." I nodded and said, "They are upstairs. Are you ready for this?" He stood up, squared his shoulders, and said, "No, but I do not think I will ever be ready, so we might as well get it over with." We walked upstairs together, two people who had started the day as neighbors and were now bonded by shared betrayal. We were both about to confront the people who had promised to love and honor us, and we were about to watch those promises crumble into dust. When I opened the bedroom door, Oliver and Isabel were sitting exactly where I had left them, but now they looked even more terrified because they knew Marcus was here. Isabel's eyes went wide when she saw her husband standing in the doorway next to me, and she started crying even harder. "Marcus," she started to say, but he held up his hand to stop her. The same gesture I had used on Oliver earlier. Marcus said, "I do not want to hear your excuses or your apologies, Isabel. I just want to hear you admit what you have done. I want to hear you say it out loud. Look me in the eyes and tell me the truth for once in your life." Isabel could not look at him. She stared down at her hands and whispered, "I am so sorry." Marcus asked again, louder this time, "Tell me the truth, Isabel. Say the words." She finally looked up at him with mascara running down her face and said, "I have been having an affair with Oliver for 2 years. I lied to you. I lied to Victoria. I betrayed our friendship and our marriage, and I am so sorry." The room fell silent after that confession, the words hanging in the air like poison gas. Marcus stood there for a long moment, just breathing, just processing, just trying to absorb the magnitude of what he had just heard. Then he turned to Oliver and said, "And you? What do you have to say for yourself?" Oliver, to his credit, or maybe to his detriment, did not try to lie or minimize. He said, "I've been having an affair with your wife for 2 years. I have been lying to Victoria. I have been planning to leave her and take as much of our shared assets as I could hide. There is no excuse for what I have done. The truth is, I am a selfish coward who took the easy path instead of being honest about my unhappiness." I felt a strange sense of respect for Oliver in that moment, not because what he had done was in any way acceptable, but because at least he was finally being honest. At least he was not insulting my intelligence further by trying to spin this into something it was not. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. I need your support to continue sharing these raw, honest stories that so many women are afraid to tell. Your subscription means everything. Marcus walked over to where Isabel was sitting and said, "I want you to pack a bag and leave our house today. I do not want you near our daughters until I have figured out how to explain this to them. I do not want to see your face or hear your voice. You can communicate through lawyers from now on." Isabel started to protest, "Marcus, please, they are my daughters." But he cut her off with a look that could have melted steel. He said, "You should have thought about them before you decided to destroy our family. You should have thought about them every single time you lied to me so you could come over here and sleep with him. You do not get to play the concerned mother now." I turned to Oliver and said, "You need to leave too. I want you out of his house within the hour. Take whatever you can carry. And everything else stays here until the lawyers sort it out. And just so you know, every cent you tried to hide, every asset you tried to move, I have documentation of all of it. Your clever plan to leave me with nothing has just backfired spectacularly. Oliver nodded slowly, looking defeated. He said, "Where am I supposed to go?" I did not have an ounce of sympathy left in my body. So I said, "I do not know, and I do not care. Maybe you and Isabel can finally get that place you've been dreaming about. Except now you will both be doing it as divorced people who lost everything. Good luck with that." Marcus and I left them there to get dressed and pack their things. We went back downstairs and sat in my living room, two shell-shocked people trying to process the fact that our lives had been completely upended in the span of less than an hour. Marcus looked at me and said, "How are you so calm right now? I feel like I'm going to explode. I should be screaming or breaking things, or I don't know what." I said, "Honestly, I think I'm in shock. I think my brain has not fully caught up with what just happened, and right now I'm just running on adrenaline and rage. Ask me again tomorrow, and I will probably be a sobbing mess on the floor. But right now, in this moment, I feel weirdly powerful, like I have taken control of a situation that could have destroyed me. And instead, I'm going to use it to rebuild something better." They both came down the stairs, carrying hastily packed bags, and looking like ghosts of the people they had been that morning. Isabel tried one more time to talk to Marcus, reaching out to touch his arm. But he stepped back from her like she was contagious. He said, "Do not touch me. Just go." She started crying again and walked out the front door without another word. Oliver stopped in front of me and said, "Victoria, I know I have hurt you in ways I can never make right. I know I have destroyed your trust and broken your heart. For what it is worth, I really am sorry." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that I did not recognize the man standing in front of me. Maybe I had never really known him at all. I said, "Your apology means nothing to me, Oliver. Save it for your lawyer. You are going to need all the sympathy you can get when this divorce is finalized." He left without another word, closing the door softly behind him. Marcus and I sat there in my living room, listening to the sound of two cars driving away, carrying two people who had just blown up their entire lives. Marcus turned to me and said, "What do we do now?" I said, "Now we call lawyers, we protect ourselves, and we start figuring out how to rebuild our lives without them. We do not let them win by falling apart. We take this pain and we turn it into fuel for becoming better, stronger versions of ourselves." Marcus reached over and squeezed my hand, and for the first time since I had walked into my bedroom that afternoon, I felt like I was not alone in this nightmare. We sat there together, two wounded people who had just discovered they were warriors, ready to fight for the lives we deserved. The rest of that day passed in a blur of phone calls and documentation. I called my lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Reynolds, who I had worked with on various contracts for my event planning business. When I told her what had happened and mentioned that I had extensive evidence of the affair and Oliver's financial manipulations, she actually laughed with what sounded like glee. "Victoria," she said, "this is the best worst-case scenario I have ever seen. With this kind of evidence, we are going to eviscerate him in court. He will be lucky if he walks away with his clothes and his toothbrush." Marcus called his lawyer too, a man named Gregory Walsh, who apparently specialized in high-conflict divorces involving infidelity. I could hear Marcus on the phone in my kitchen, his voice steady and controlled as he explained the situation. When he hung up, he came back into the living room and said, "My lawyer says that with the evidence you found, especially the messages where Isabel mocked me using private information I shared with her, I should have a very strong case for primary custody of the girls. She basically documented her own unfitness as a parent by treating our marriage like a joke." We spent hours that afternoon going through every message, every email, every document, organizing everything into a clear timeline that our lawyers could use. It was painful to read it all again, to see in explicit detail how thoroughly we had been deceived. But it was also empowering. We were not helpless victims. We were people who had discovered the truth and were now armed with the ammunition we needed to protect ourselves. That night, after Marcus finally went home to his empty house and his daughters who were mercifully at his mother's for the evening, I walked through my brownstone and tried to reclaim the space that had been violated. I stripped the bed, thrown the sheets into the trash rather than washing them because I never wanted to see them again. I opened every window to air out the rooms, as if I could physically blow away the traces of betrayal that seemed to linger in every corner. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my kitchen, and that is when the shock finally started to wear off and the real emotions began to hit me. I cried for the first time since it had all happened, big, ugly sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. I cried for the 9 years I had invested in a marriage that turned out to be a lie. I cried for the friendship I had lost, or rather, the friendship I thought I had that had never actually existed. I cried for all the times I had defended Oliver when my family expressed concerns about him, for all the times I had trusted Isabel with my secrets and vulnerabilities. I cried for the version of myself who had woken up that morning thinking she knew exactly who she was and where she was going, only to discover that she had been living in a carefully constructed illusion. But somewhere in the middle of all that crying, something shifted. I realized that while I was grieving for what I had lost, I was also feeling something else entirely. Relief. Underneath all the pain and betrayal, there was this enormous sense of relief because I was finally free. Free from a marriage that had been making me unhappy for longer than I wanted to admit. Free from the pressure of maintaining a friendship that had always felt slightly off, even though I could never put my finger on why. Free from the exhausting work of being the perfect wife and perfect friend and perfect neighbor. The mask had been ripped off, and yes, it hurt like hell, but I could finally breathe. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and difficult conversations. Oliver had apparently gone to stay with his brother in New Jersey, while Isabel had checked into a hotel because Marcus had changed the locks on their house. My lawyer moved quickly, filing for divorce and immediately putting freezes on all our joint accounts so Oliver could not move any more money. When his lawyer tried to claim that I was being unreasonable, Patricia simply sent over a sample of the evidence we had collected, including the spreadsheet where Oliver had detailed his plan to hide assets. His lawyer went quiet after that, and suddenly Oliver was very willing to negotiate a fair settlement. Marcus was dealing with his own legal battle, complicated by the fact that he and Isabel had children together. He had filed for primary physical custody, citing the affair and the messages where Isabel had admitted to putting her relationship with Oliver above her responsibilities to her family. It was ugly and painful, and I watched Marcus struggle with the guilt of putting his daughters through a difficult divorce, even though he knew it was not his fault. Through it all, Marcus and I became genuine friends, bonded by shared trauma, but also by a mutual respect for how we were each handling an impossible situation. We had dinner together a few times a week, sometimes cooking at my place, sometimes ordering takeout at his. We talked about everything and nothing, processing our feelings, sharing memories of the red flags we had missed, and slowly starting to imagine what our futures might look like without the people we had thought we would spend our lives with. One evening, about 6 weeks after the discovery, we were sitting on my back patio with glasses of wine, watching the sun set over the Brooklyn rooftops. Marcus turned to me and said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," I said. He hesitated for a moment and then said, "Do you think you will ever be able to trust someone again? Like really trust them? The way you trusted Oliver before all this happened?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. I said, "I think the question is not whether I will trust again, but whether I will trust the same way." I trusted Oliver blindly, without question, without ever checking to see if that trust was deserved. I gave him the benefit of the doubt so many times when my gut was telling me something was wrong. So yes, I think I will trust again, but it will be a trust that is earned and verified, not just handed over like a blank check. Does that make sense? Marcus nodded slowly. He said, "It makes perfect sense, because I have been thinking the same thing. I feel like I need to learn the difference between being trusting and being naive. And I am not sure I knew there was a difference before this happened." We sat in comfortable silence after that, both of us contemplating the lessons we were learning from our pain. About 3 months after everything exploded, the divorce proceedings had progressed to the point where Oliver and I needed to sit down together with our lawyers to finalize certain details. It was the first time I had seen him since that day, and I was nervous about how I would react. Would I cry? Would I yell? Would I feel anything at all? When I walked into Patricia's conference room and saw Oliver sitting there, looking thinner and older than I remembered, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no lingering affection. He was just a stranger who happened to know a lot of personal details about my life. The meeting was professional and efficient. Oliver had agreed to a settlement that was very favorable to me, probably because his lawyer had advised him that fighting would only make things worse given the evidence against him. He would keep his retirement account, but I would get the brownstone, our savings, and a substantial portion of his bonuses from the past 3 years. He tried to catch my eye several times during the meeting, as if he wanted to communicate something, but I kept my gaze firmly on the documents in front of me. When it was over and we were signing the final papers, Oliver said, "Victoria, can we talk for just a minute, alone?" I looked at Patricia, who gave me a small nod that said it was my choice, but she would be right outside if I needed her. I said, "You have 5 minutes, Oliver. What do you want to say?" He waited until the lawyers had left the room and then said, "I know this does not mean anything to you now, but I want you to know that I really am sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for what I did. You deserved so much better than what I gave you, and I hope you find someone who appreciates you the way I never did." I looked at him for a long moment and then said, "Thank you for saying that, but you are right. It does not mean anything to me. You know what would have meant something? If you had been honest with me 2 years ago when you first started having feelings for Isabel. If you had come to me and said that our marriage was not working and we needed to either fix it or end it, that would have been the act of someone who respected me. What you did instead was cowardly and cruel, and I will never forgive you for it. I do not need your apology, Oliver. I need you to sign those papers and get out of my life." His face fell, and I could see that some part of him had been hoping for absolution, for me to tell him that it was okay, and I understood and we could part as friends. But I was not going to give him that. He did not deserve my forgiveness, and I was not going to diminish my own pain just to make him feel better about his choices. He signed the papers without another word, and I walked out of that conference room feeling lighter than I had in years. The divorce was finalized 4 months after I had walked in on Oliver and Isabel in my bedroom. In those 4 months, I had done more growing and changing than I had in the previous 9 years of my marriage. I had started therapy to process the betrayal and to understand the patterns in my life that had led me to ignore red flags. I had reconnected with friends I had let slip away because Oliver had not liked them. I had taken up hobbies I had abandoned because they were not things Oliver wanted to do together. I had painted my bedroom a deep emerald green that Oliver would have hated, but I loved. I had bought new furniture, new art for the walls, new dishes that I had picked out just for myself. I was slowly but surely turning my brownstone from a place that had been ours into a place that was undeniably and completely mine. Marcus's divorce was taking longer because of the custody issues, but he was making progress. Isabel had fought for joint custody of the girls, but the court had been persuaded by the evidence of her affair and her documented disregard for her family's well-being. Marcus had been awarded primary physical custody, with Isabel getting the girls every other weekend and 1 evening a week for dinner. It was not the outcome she had wanted, but it was what she had earned through her choices. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 months after everything had fallen apart, Marcus and I were having lunch at a cafe in our neighborhood when we saw them, Oliver and Isabel, walking down the street together, holding hands. They looked happy, or at least they looked like they were trying to look happy. Marcus and I both froze for a moment, and I felt my heart rate spike as I prepared for the rush of emotions I assumed would come. But as I watched them walk past the cafe, completely oblivious to our presence, I realized I felt nothing but pity. They had destroyed 2 marriages, hurt children, lost friends, and damaged their own reputations, all for a relationship that was built on lies and betrayal. Even if they did manage to make it work, they would always know that their foundation was rotten. Marcus must have been thinking the same thing, because he turned to me and said, "Do you think they will make it?" I shrugged and said, "Honestly, I do not care. Whether they stay together or fall apart, it does not affect my life anymore. They are not my problem." He smiled and raised his coffee cup in a toast. He said, "I will drink to that, to them not being our problem anymore." I clinked my cup against his and said, "To new beginnings and better choices." As the months turned into a year, I found myself genuinely happy for the first time in longer than I could remember. My work was thriving because I had thrown myself into it with renewed energy and creativity. I had been promoted to senior partner at my firm, a recognition of the incredible events I had been pulling off. I had traveled to Paris for a solo trip, something I had always wanted to do but Oliver had never been interested in. I had spent 2 weeks wandering the streets, visiting museums, eating incredible food, and proving to myself that I could be happy alone. Marcus and I remained close friends, and we joked sometimes about how we had gotten the better end of the deal. His daughters were thriving under his primary care, and he had become an even more involved and present father than he had been before. He had started dating someone new, a teacher he had met at his daughter's school. And from what he told me, it was a relationship built on honesty and communication rather than the comfortable complacency that had characterized his marriage to Isabel. I had started dating too, cautiously at first, but with increasing confidence as I learned to trust my own judgment again. I had met a man named Daniel through a mutual friend, and we had been seeing each other for about 3 months. He was patient with my boundaries, understanding of my past, and refreshingly honest about his own baggage from a previous divorce. We took things slowly, and I appreciated that he never pushed me for more than I was ready to give. I did not know if Daniel was my forever person, but I knew that I was capable of opening my heart again, and that felt like a victory in itself. One evening, almost exactly a year after the day my life had imploded, I was sitting on my back patio with a glass of wine, reflecting on how much had changed. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I was surprised to see that it was from Isabel. We had not spoken since the day I had kicked her out of my house, and I had blocked her on all social media. But apparently, she had gotten a new number because here was a message from an unknown contact that said, "Victoria, this is Isabel. I know you probably do not want to hear from me, but I wanted to reach out because I owe you a real apology. Not the panicked sorry I gave you that day, but a real, thoughtful acknowledgement of what I did to you. Would you be willing to meet for coffee? I promise I will respect your answer if it is no." I stared at that message for a long time, trying to decide how I felt. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to maintain the wall I had built between myself and the people who had hurt me. But another part of me was curious. What could Isabel possibly have to say that would make any difference now? And honestly, I realized I was no longer angry at her. I had processed that anger in therapy. I had worked through the betrayal, and I had come out the other side as someone who did not need to hold on to rage to feel powerful. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. These stories matter because they show us that we can survive anything, and your support helps me continue sharing that message with women everywhere. I texted back, I am willing to meet, but I need you to understand that I am not looking for us to be friends again. If you want to apologize, I will listen, but that is all I am promising. She responded almost immediately, Thank you, Victoria. That is all I am asking for. How about next Saturday at the cafe on Court Street, 10 in the morning? I agreed to the time and place, and then I sat back and wondered what the hell I had just agreed to. When Saturday arrived, I walked into the cafe and saw Isabel already sitting at a corner table, nursing a cup of tea. She looked different than I remembered, thinner, with more lines around her eyes, and a general air of someone who had been through something difficult. She stood up when she saw me, and for a moment I thought she was going to try to hug me, but she seemed to sense that would not be welcome, and just gestured to the chair across from her. We sat in awkward silence for a moment, and then Isabel said, Thank you for coming. I was not sure you would. I said, To be honest, I was not sure I would either. But I guess I needed to hear what you had to say. She nodded and took a deep breath. She said, I have been in therapy for the past 6 months, working through why I made the choices I made. And one of the things my therapist has been pushing me to do is take real accountability for the harm I caused. Not just to say I am sorry, but to really acknowledge the specific ways I hurt you and betrayed your trust. She paused, gathering her thoughts, and then continued, Victoria, what I did to you was not just an affair. It was a systematic destruction of a friendship that you valued and trusted. I used the intimacy we had built to gain access to your life, to your home, to your vulnerabilities. I listened to you talk about your marriage problems, and instead of supporting you as a friend should, I used that information to get closer to your husband. I betrayed you in ways that were calculated and deliberate. And I want you to know that I understand that now. At the time, I told myself it was love, that Oliver and I had some special connection that justified what we were doing. But the truth is, it was just selfishness and cowardice. I was unhappy in my marriage, and instead of dealing with that honestly, I blew up 2 families. I sat there listening to her, watching her face as she spoke, and I realized that she was being genuine. This was not the panicked, defensive Isabel from that day in my bedroom. This was someone who had actually done the work to understand the magnitude of what she had done. I said, I appreciate you saying all of that, Isabel. I really do. But I need you to understand that your apology, as sincere as it is, does not change what happened. It does not erase the pain or rebuild the trust. I have forgiven you, not because you deserve it, but because holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you. But forgiveness does not mean we go back to being friends. That relationship died the day I found you in my bathtub, and it is not coming back. She nodded, tears running down her cheeks. I know, she said. I do not expect us to be friends again. I just needed you to know that I see what I did, and I'm sorry. I also wanted to tell you that Oliver and I are not together anymore. We tried to make it work, but it turned out that a relationship built on betrayal is not a solid foundation. Who'd have thought? She laughed bitterly at that, and I found myself almost smiling at the irony. We talked for about 30 more minutes, and she told me about how the affair had fallen apart, how the reality of being together without the excitement of sneaking around had revealed that they did not actually have much in common. She told me about her struggle to rebuild her relationship with her daughters, who were angry at her for breaking up their family. She told me about her therapy and her attempts to figure out who she was outside of being defined by the men in her life. I listened with something approaching compassion, recognizing that while she had caused immense harm, she was also a human being who was suffering the consequences of her choices. When we finally stood up to leave, Isabel said one more thing. She said, "For what it is worth, watching you handle this whole situation with such grace and strength changed something in me. You could have destroyed me publicly, you could have turned everyone against me, but you just quietly took care of yourself and moved on. That was more powerful than any revenge could have been. And it made me realize how small I had been. Thank you for that lesson, even though I did not deserve to learn it from you." I left that cafe feeling strangely at peace. I had faced the person who had hurt me. I had heard her apology, and I had maintained my boundaries while still extending a small measure of compassion. It felt like closing a chapter that I had needed to close in order to fully move forward. The next few months continued to be a period of growth and discovery. I sold the brownstone, deciding that I needed a completely fresh start in a space that did not carry any memories of Oliver. I bought a beautiful loft in a different neighborhood, all exposed brick and huge windows, and I decorated it entirely to my own taste. I hosted dinner parties for my real friends, the ones who had stood by me through the divorce. I dated Daniel seriously enough that he started peeping a toothbrush at my place, though we were both very clear that we were not rushing into anything. Marcus's daughters started calling me Aunt Victoria, and I loved being a part of their lives in this chosen family kind of way. I watched them grow and thrive under Marcus's care, and I was grateful that even though our situation had started with such pain, it had led to genuine friendships and connections that enriched all of our lives. One Saturday morning, about 18 months after the discovery, I was at a farmer's market picking out flowers for my new loft when I ran into Patricia, my lawyer. She gave me a huge smile and said, "Victoria, you look amazing. How are you doing?" I smiled back and realized that I truly meant it when I said, "I am doing really well, Patricia. Better than I have been in years, honestly." She looked at me with this knowing expression and said, "You know what I love about you? You took a situation that would have destroyed most people, and you used it as a catalyst to completely reinvent your life. That takes a special kind of strength." As I walked home from the farmer's market that day, my arms full of fresh flowers and my heart full of contentment, I reflected on how true Patricia's words were. The discovery of Oliver and Isabel's affair had been the most painful experience of my life up to that point, but it had also been the most transformative. It had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself, about the ways I had been complicit in my own unhappiness, by ignoring red flags and accepting less than I deserved. It had taught me that I was stronger than I ever imagined, that I could survive betrayal and come out the other side, not just intact, but actually improved. I had learned to trust my instincts again, to listen to that little voice in the back of my head that says something is not right, instead of pushing it aside because I wanted to believe in a fantasy. I had learned that being alone was not the worst thing that could happen to me, that in fact, being alone was infinitely better than being in a relationship that made me feel lonely. I had learned that I did not need a partner to complete me, that I was already complete on my own, and that any relationship I chose to have should add to my life rather than define it. Most importantly, I had learned that I had the power to write my own story, that I was not just a character reacting to what other people did to me, but the author who got to decide how the story would unfold from this point forward. Oliver and Isabel had tried to write me as the naive, clueless wife who would be left with nothing, but I had taken the pen away from them and written myself as the protagonist who discovered her own strength and built a better life. As I sit here now, more than 2 years after that Wednesday, when I came home from my iPad and discovered a truth that shattered my world, I can honestly say that I am grateful for what happened. Not grateful for the pain or the betrayal, but grateful for the growth that came from it. Grateful for the opportunity to become the version of myself that I was always meant to be, but had been too comfortable to discover. That version of Victoria, who was living in the brownstone with Oliver, who was best friends with Isabel, who followed her safe and predictable routine, she was not happy. She was just comfortable. And she had mistaken comfort for happiness because she did not know there was a difference. The Victoria I am today is genuinely happy. I wake up every morning in my loft that I chose and decorated, in a bed that is mine alone unless I choose to share it, in a life that reflects my values and my desires and nobody else's. I have work that challenges and fulfills me. I have friendships that are based on genuine mutual respect and honesty, rather than proximity and convenience. I have a romantic relationship with Daniel that is still evolving, but that is built on a foundation of clear communication and respect for boundaries. And most importantly, I have a relationship with myself that is strong and loving and kind. In truth, I have a relationship with myself that is strong and loving and kind. And most importantly, I have a relationship with myself that is strong and loving and kind. And most importantly, I have a relationship with myself that is strong and loving and kind. And from what I can see, they have built something real and healthy together. His daughters are thriving, and they have adjusted to having two homes and accepting that their mom made mistakes that hurt everyone, but that they are still loved by both parents. Marcus told me recently that his oldest daughter, who is now 13, said to him, "Dad, I am glad you and Mom got divorced because you are so much happier now, and that makes me happy too." He cried when he told me that, but they were good tears. Tears of gratitude that his daughter was perceptive enough to see the truth and resilient enough to accept it. I have had the opportunity to share my story with other women who are going through similar situations, and I have been amazed by how common my experience is. So many women have reached out to me, either through mutual friends or through the divorce support group I briefly attended, telling me their own stories of betrayal and survival. What I tell all of them is the same thing that I wish someone had told me earlier. Your value is not determined by whether someone chooses to love you faithfully. Your value is inherent and unchanging. When someone betrays you, it is a reflection of their character, not yours. And while the betrayal will hurt, possibly more than anything has ever hurt before, it is also an opportunity. An opportunity to examine your life honestly, to identify the places where you settled or compromised or ignored your intuition, and to make different choices going forward. I tell them that it is okay to grieve, to be angry, to feel all the messy, complicated emotions that come with having your life turned upside down. But I also tell them that on the other side of that grief is a kind of freedom that they might never have experienced otherwise. The freedom to be completely and unapologetically themselves, to build a life that reflects their own dreams rather than someone else's expectations, to discover strengths they never knew they had. I still see Oliver occasionally, in the way that you inevitably run into people in a city like New York. We are polite to each other, distant but cordial. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he has struggled professionally since the divorce, that his reputation took a hit when word got out about the affair and the attempted financial manipulation. I do not take any pleasure in his struggles, but I also do not feel any sympathy. He made choices, and those choices had consequences. That is how life works. I have not seen or spoken to Isabel since that coffee meeting over a year ago, and I do not expect I ever will again. I heard that she moved to a different part of Brooklyn to be closer to her daughter's school, and to get a fresh start, away from the neighborhood where everyone knew what she had done. I hope she has found some measure of peace, and that she has continued to work on herself in therapy. Not because I care about her happiness, but because her daughters deserve a mother who is healthy and present. The other day, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, working on plans for a wedding, when a young woman approached me hesitantly. She said, "Excuse me, are you Victoria Hartwell?" I said yes, a little confused about how she knew my name. She said, "My friend went through your divorce support group, and she told me your story." I am going through something similar right now. My husband cheated with someone I thought was my friend, and I just wanted to say thank you. Your story gave me hope that I could survive this and maybe even be happy again someday. I invited her to sit down, and we talked for an hour about her situation, about the shock of betrayal, about the grief and anger and confusion. I shared with her some of the strategies that helped me, the importance of documentation and good legal representation, the value of therapy and support groups, the power of building a life that reflects who you truly are, rather than who you thought you were supposed to be. When she left, she hugged me tightly and said, "I came here feeling like my life was over, and I am leaving feeling like maybe it is just beginning. Thank you for showing me what is possible." That interaction reminded me why it is so important to share our stories, especially the painful ones. We live in a culture that often encourages us to hide our struggles, to present a perfect facade to the world, to pretend that everything is fine, even when it's falling apart. But there is so much power in honesty, in saying, "This is what happened to me, this is how it felt, and this is how I survived." Because when we share our stories, we give other people permission to share theirs. We create a community of survivors who can support and encourage each other, who can say, "I understand and I believe you, and you are going to make it through this." If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Every subscription, every like, every comment from a woman sharing her own story or supporting another woman's story. That is how we build something bigger than ourselves. That is how we create change. Your voice matters, and I want to hear it. Looking back now on that Wednesday afternoon when I drove home to get my iPad and instead found my husband and best friend in my bathtub, I can see it as a dividing line in my life. There was the before Victoria, who lived in a carefully controlled world where everything had its place and surprises were unwelcome. And there is the after Victoria, who understands that life is messy and unpredictable, and that the only thing we can truly control is how we respond to what happens to us. The before Victoria would have been devastated by betrayal, might have fallen apart completely, might have become bitter and closed off to the possibility of love and trust. But the after Victoria took that betrayal and used it as fuel for transformation. She did not let it define her or diminish her. She let it reveal her, stripping away all the pretense and performance to expose the strong, resilient, authentic woman who had been there all along, just waiting for an opportunity to emerge. I've also learned that healing is not linear. There are still days, even now, when something will trigger a memory and I feel a flash of anger or hurt. Maybe I'll see a couple holding hands and remember when I thought Oliver and I were happy. Maybe I will see a woman laughing with her friend and remember how I trusted Isabel with my deepest secrets. But those moments are fewer and farther between, and they do not derail me the way they once did. I've learned to acknowledge the feeling, to sit with it for a moment, and then to let it go and return to the present where I am safe and happy and free. I've also learned the importance of forgiveness, but not the kind of forgiveness that people often talk about, where you forgive someone and then welcome them back into your life as if nothing happened. The forgiveness I have practiced is more about releasing the hold that the betrayal had on me, choosing not to carry the weight of anger and resentment because it was making me tired and bitter. I've forgiven Oliver and Isabel for what they did, but that does not mean I trust them or want them in my life. Forgiveness and reconciliation are two different things, and I have chosen forgiveness without reconciliation, which I think is the healthiest choice for me. Daniel and I have been talking lately about moving in together, and while the idea still makes me a little nervous given my history, I'm also excited about it. We have built something real together, something based on honesty and communication and mutual respect. He knows my whole story, all the ugly, painful parts, and he has never tried to minimize it or rush me through my healing process. He has been patient with my trust issues, understanding when I need space, and reliable in ways that help me feel safe enough to be vulnerable again. The other night, we were lying in bed talking about the future, and he said to me, "Victoria, I want you to know that I see you. Not the version of yourself you think I want to see, but the real you with all your scars and fears and strengths. And that is who I am choosing every single day." I started crying when he said that because it was everything I had never known I needed to hear. Oliver had never really seen me. He had seen only the parts of me that were useful or convenient for him. But Daniel sees all of me and chooses me anyway. And that feels like a kind of love I did not know existed. I have also reconnected with my creativity in ways I had let slip during my marriage. I started painting again, something I loved to do in college, but had abandoned because Oliver thought it was a waste of time and money. My loft has become a gallery of my own work, colorful abstract pieces that express emotions I do not always have words for. I have even sold a few pieces through a local gallery, which feels like validation of something I had been told was not worthwhile. I am learning that the opinions of others, even people we love, do not define what has value in our lives. If something brings us joy or helps us process emotions or allows us to express ourselves, then it is worthwhile, regardless of whether anyone else understands or appreciates it. I have also made it a priority to maintain the friendship with Marcus because he understands my journey in ways that nobody else can. We both went through the same trauma at the same time, and we both chose to handle it with grace and strength rather than bitterness and revenge. We have a bond that is unique and special, and I am grateful for his presence in my life. His daughters have become like nieces to me, and I love being able to be a positive female influence in their lives, showing them what it looks like to be a woman who knows her own worth and does not settle for less than she deserves. Sometimes I wonder what my life would look like if I had never found out about the affair, if Oliver and Isabel had been more careful, if they had managed to keep their secret until Oliver was ready to execute his plan to leave me with nothing. Would I still be living in that brownstone, still believing I was happy, still going through the motions of a marriage that was dead without knowing it? A thought makes me shudder, because that version of my life feels like a prison I did not even know I was trapped in. In a strange way, Oliver and Isabel did me a favor by being careless enough to get caught. They forced me to wake up and face truths I had been avoiding. They pushed me out of my comfortable complacency and into a period of painful growth that ultimately led to genuine happiness. I would never choose to go through that experience again, but I also would not trade the person I have become as a result of it. This version of Victoria, the one who knows her own strength and value, the one who has rebuilt her life according to her own vision, the one who has learned to trust herself above all others. This is the person I was always meant to be. I just needed the catalyst of betrayal to burn away everything that was false and reveal what was true. I think about the women who will read this story or hear this story, and I hope they take from it whatever they need. Maybe you are in the middle of your own betrayal right now, feeling like your world is ending and you will never be happy again. I want you to know that you will survive this. It will hurt, possibly more than anything has ever hurt, but you will survive it and you will be stronger on the other side. Maybe you are in a relationship right now where something feels off, but you're afraid to look too closely because you do not want to know the truth. I want you to know that the truth, as painful as it might be, is always better than living in a lie. Trust your instincts. They are trying to protect you. Maybe you are someone who has never experienced betrayal, but you are afraid of it, afraid to be vulnerable in relationships because you do not want to get hurt. I want you to know that yes, vulnerability comes with risk, but it also comes with the possibility of real connection and genuine love. The key is to be vulnerable with people who have earned that trust, and to be willing to walk away if that trust is betrayed. Your value does not decrease based on someone else's inability to see your worth. And maybe you are someone who's betrayed someone else, who's been the Oliver or the Isabel in someone else's story. I want you to know that while I cannot speak for everyone, I can say that real accountability and genuine change are possible if you're willing to do the hard work. Not apologies to make yourself feel better, but real examination of why you made the choices you made and how you can make different choices going forward. Forgiveness is possible, but it starts with you taking full responsibility for your actions without excuses or justifications. As I finish writing this story, I am sitting in my loft on a sunny Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and a sense of profound peace. My life looks nothing like I thought it would 2 years ago. And that is the most wonderful thing. I am not Mrs. Oliver Hartwell anymore. I am not the perfect wife or the perfect neighbor or the perfect anything. I am just Victoria, a woman who has been through hell and come out the other side with her sense of self intact and her capacity for joy restored. The brownstone in Brooklyn, where my old life fell apart, is now home to a young family, and I hope they are filling it with laughter and love and better memories than mine. The job that once defined so much of my identity is still important to me, but it does not consume me the way it once did. I have learned to set boundaries, to say no when I need to prioritize my own well-being over external measures of success. And as for Oliver and Isabel, wherever they are and whatever they are doing, I genuinely wish them peace. Not because they deserve it, but because holding on to anger toward them would only hurt me. They are no longer characters in my story, except as the catalysts who pushed me toward the life I was meant to have. They made their choices, and I have made mine, and our paths have diverged in ways that will probably never intersect again. I want to end this story by saying thank you to everyone who has listened to my journey, who has shared their own stories with me, who has supported me through the process of healing and rebuilding. Your presence in my life, whether as a friend, a family member, a support group member, or simply as someone who has listened to my story, has been a gift. You have reminded me that I am not alone, that my experience matters, and that there is power in sharing our truths with each other. To the woman who is reading this and seeing herself in my story, I want you to know that you are stronger than you think you are. Whatever you're facing right now, whatever betrayal or heartbreak or loss has brought you to this moment, you have the strength within you to not just survive, but to thrive. Your story is not over. This is just a chapter, a painful and difficult chapter, but not the end of the book. You get to write what comes next, and I promise you that what comes next can be beautiful if you're brave enough to believe in yourself and patient enough to let yourself heal. The woman I was when I walked into that bedroom 2 years ago would not recognize the woman I am today, and that is exactly how it should be. Growth requires change, and change requires letting go of who we were to make room for who we are becoming. I let go of the naive, trusting woman who ignored her instincts and settled for less than she deserved. I let go of the woman who believed that being a good wife meant diminishing herself to make her husband comfortable. I let go of the woman who thought that a perfect surface meant a perfect life. In their place, I have become a woman who trusts herself first, who knows that her intuition is a gift rather than something to be ignored, who understands that she does not need to shrink herself to fit into someone else's vision of who she should be. I have become a woman who knows that being alone is not the worst thing that can happen, that being in a bad relationship is far worse than being single. I have become a woman who understands that true strength is not about never falling apart, but about having the courage to put yourself back together again. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Together, we are creating a space where women can share their stories without shame, where we can support each other through the darkest moments, and where we can celebrate the strength and resilience that exists within each of us. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being brave enough to share your own stories. And thank you for believing that we all deserve lives filled with honesty, respect, and genuine happiness. This is my story. This is how I discovered that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is actually the best thing, because it forces you to become the person you were always meant to be. This is how I learned that betrayal, while agonizingly painful, can also be the catalyst for the most profound transformation. This is how I found myself by losing everything I thought defined me. And this is how I learned that a woman's voice, speaking her truth without apology or shame, has the power to change not just her own life, but the lives of every woman who hears it and recognizes herself in the story. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Thank you for listening to my truth. And thank you for being part of a community of women who refuse to be defined by what has been done to them, but instead choose to be defined by how they rise from the ashes and rebuild their lives according to their own vision. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And you matter. Never forget that. I am Victoria Hartwell, and this was my story of betrayal, survival, and ultimately triumph. May it serve as a reminder to every woman listening that no matter how dark the moment, no matter how complete the devastation, you have within you the strength to not just survive, but to flourish. The best revenge is not revenge at all. It is building a life so full of joy and authenticity that the people who tried to destroy you become irrelevant. That's what I have done, and that's what you can do too. From my loft in Brooklyn, with sunlight streaming through the windows and a future full of possibilities stretching out before me, I send you love, strength, and the absolute certainty that you are capable of more than you ever imagined. Your transformation awaits. All you have to do is be brave enough to walk through the fire and see what emerges on the other side. I promise you, it will be worth it. Thank you, and may your journey be filled with courage, growth, and the kind of happiness that comes from truly knowing and loving yourself. This is Victoria Hartwell, signing off, but never forgetting that every ending is also a beginning, and the best chapters of our lives are often the ones we write after everything falls apart.